Live from our hurricane headquarters with real-time analysis from some of the nation's top meteorologists, this is Tracking the Tropics, powered by Bose Electric.
The latest update on Tropical Storm Erin. Still not quite a hurricane, but that is expected to change, as I'm sure you've heard. Man, screaming to the west at 17 miles per hour. Welcome to the WFLA Stream Center. I'm meteorologist Rebecca Berry, and I'm joined by meteorologist Juliana Mejia, and she is doing all the hard work on the graphics for us today. Welcome. You know, we don't normally stream on Tuesdays at 12:30, but because there has been so much interest in Erin and the new model runs have come out, we wanted to hop on and do a deep dive on what those model runs are showing us, what we're kind of seeing from that, and what we can expect maybe to change a little bit or what we're pretty certain of at this point. And so I know you've been working on it all morning long, Juliana, and it looks a little better than it did last week, that's for sure.
Yes. Yeah. Erin now kind of coming back to life a little bit after having been struggling with the convection there quite a bit. But honestly, as of this last, update and forecast that we got from the National Hurricane Center, really not much change, which, is good. Like, consistency is good and really what we want to see. So I'll here take a bigger look. Well, I'll go to the wall here in a moment.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead.
That's okay? Okay, awesome.
Yeah, send you the wall.
And we'll take a look at the forecast cone and the latest in case y'all haven't seen that 11 a.m. update from the National Hurricane Center. 45 mile per hour winds, still pretty consistent there in terms of max wind speeds with Erin, as well as now moving the touch slower from 20 down to 17 miles per hour, which is essentially what we all anticipated. Part of that is that subtropical high that's just sitting right above Erin is weakening a little bit, so it's not helping to propel Erin along so much. But the forecast itself really didn't change much at all, if at all, with now they're still expecting Tropical Storm Erin to maintain tropical storm status through the next 24 hours. 48 hours is when we're still looking to about Friday for that potentially then first hurricane of the season as a Category 1 hurricane in steady strengthening, but a little faster strengthening from there, taking us into the potential that this becomes the first major hurricane of the season heading into Sunday and Monday. What we do like to see now as we continue to work our way through this week and we get closer to time is that the National Hurricane Center's forecast cone does reflect that eventual turn that models have been signaling now for days. Also, what I do like to see is that Puerto Rico, portions of the Virgin Islands are no longer in that cone. They haven't been in that cone since this morning as well. But it is also a good reminder then too that impacts can and will be felt outside of the cone. So folks heading to Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, or that live there, if you have family there, you want to make sure that they're still keeping a close eye on this forecast, because even the National Hurricane Center is still communicating right now the uncertainty of what those impacts could look like for those areas. Tropical Storm Erin right now, just getting a closer look at the satellite imagery, still not incredibly impressive, and you could still at least see now a little bit more of that convection blossoming on the southern side of the storm. I wanted to get a close look just to remind y'all and see, this isn't all too far still. And what I find myself reiterating each and every hurricane season is the nature of the forecast cone. The cone itself shows where the center of a storm could potentially reside or potentially exist. So if we're talking the outermost edge of this cone being the center of the storm, and we're forecasting, and the National Hurricane Center is forecasting a Category 2 upwards of a Category 3 hurricane brushing by the Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico. That's why it's so important for those areas to keep a close eye as we work our way towards this upcoming weekend. Here's a look at the latest spaghetti model plots, very much reflecting the forecast cone. We like to see the consistency here at least through the next few days, and then once we hit about that 7-day mark, looking to next Tuesday, Wednesday, all of them very consistent with that northward turn, keeping this offshore for the eastern seaboard of the United States. But there is still a little bit more of that spread. Some of these want to jog this a little farther to the west, taking this a little closer to the east coast of the U.S. compared to others. Of course, Bermuda is an area that will be watching this very closely as well. And naturally, luckily, this consistent forecast has been that this elongated area of high pressure, our subtropical high, will eventually split apart as this continues to work its way farther to the east. And then we're tracking our heat dome for this weekend into Saturday and Sunday. That's going to crank up the heat across the southeast United States. Erin then has this escape alley to take that northerly jog as we work our way then into Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday, which is the trend now has been consistent just for days. Here's a look at the model trend for Erin as well over the last couple of runs, specifically since this is valid since here yesterday all the way into today. And generally what to take away from this, one is the spread has shrunk a little bit, which is good news and what we like to see, as well as fair consistency with the mean ensemble models here, keeping this fairly close to where they've been now for about 24 hours. So again, consistency is key. That is what we're watching for is trends, and the trends have been positive. So certainly not trying to hype anything up. I know lots of people like to, get a little testy sometimes talking about whether, it's going to be a fish storm and then feeling as though it's hype to talk about a system. But this is just keeping everyone in the know. There are areas that can and likely will feel some impacts from this system. So it's a good idea to keep an eye on that forecast. Here's also a look at the trends lately with the intensity forecast. And again, also here, no major changes, though plenty of these as we look out to, it's about 3 to 4 days. Plenty of these take us at the very least into that hurricane status, if not eventually that Cat 2 and Cat 3, the longer out we look. So comparing the GFS versus the Euro, always something handy and a handy tool here to analyze various systems. Also good consistency here with that northerly jog, the European a little bit farther to the west compared to the American. So again, it's all fair to say that folks along the east coast of the U.S. Should also still just keep an eye on Erin's forecast over the next few days. However, it is looking very good, and our odds are looking very good that this stays offshore in the Atlantic, and the east coast could at least likely expect some surf that's kicked up a little bit. Comparing also the spaghetti model plots and the ensembles, not just the deterministic runs of the GFS and Euro, you can see a little bit more of that spread. And the Euro in white, the GFS in orange. This is where you see a little more almost similarities among the two, but also just showing and reiterating the very good trends that we like to see. And from there, want to just take a quick glance as well as to the strengthening forecast. The reason being right now still Tropical Storm Erin maintaining that tropical storm status, in part largely one because there is some Saharan dust in the atmosphere and still that drier air in the atmosphere where Erin's located, but as well the very modest sea surface temperatures. Over the next 48 hours then we start to progress farther to the west over much warmer sea surface temperatures, and that's when Erin looks to likely take off and kind of hit the home running a little bit, or hit the ground running a little bit more, and start to inch towards potentially that major hurricane status. And there's also just a visual for you of the Saharan dust that this is still kind of wrapped up in a little bit, but as we've been talking about, more likely than not that Saharan dust will thin out as Erin continues to work.
Absolutely. And now we are coming to the most fun part of our live program here, which is the live meteorologist Q&A. So you can ask us a question, you can make a comment, but in order for us to be able to see that comment or question, you need to use one of our branded hashtags. They're hashtag Hey Rebecca or hashtag Hey Juliana, and we'll be able to bring them into our system. And I know this storm has gotten a lot of attention even before it was a storm, so people have a lot of thoughts. So let's get straight to that Q&A. And so if you use the hashtag Hey Rebecca or hashtag Hey Juliana, we'll be able to see them and answer those questions. This is from Joan, and it's one of our featured comments. Hashtag Hey Rebecca, it still seems like the storm will miss Florida. Is that true? And certainly looks that way, Joan. I am not worried about this one being the big one. We've got such good agreement on the Euro and the GFS. You know, they're a little bit apart, but not really. They're both forecasting that same turn, and that turn's important. And Juliana showed you that why it's going to make that turn with the break in the high pressure, giving giving the system that escape alley so that it can make its way out. All right, we got another featured question here. I'm going to send this one over to Juliana. They're leaving for a cruise to the Bahamas this weekend. What do you think?
Exactly. Lots of questions around this. And, you know, luckily what we can confide in is that the cruise ship organizers and the, do what I want to call them, pilots, the cruise directors, they will know what to do. They will be working around, they have for probably many years worked their way around tropical systems. So luckily, again, the trend is positive, and this will likely be a ways away and actively making the turn. Yes, near the Bahamas, but odds are you can probably expect at least some residual weather and the probably some wet weather in the vicinity, but otherwise I wouldn't necessarily go pulling the plug on any trips.
It certainly could make the seas a little bit rougher. That's what I would worry more about on the cruise, is feeling it a little bit more.
Some Dramamine,
yeah,
for sure.
We'll Dramamine, but they're really good at driving around bad weather. You may end up with a different itinerary based on the weather, but they don't put you in danger. They have their own team of meteorologists, and so hopefully it does pull a little bit further east. If it makes that more aggressive turn, it would actually pull the moisture away from the Bahamas. You might end up with like slightly nicer weather.
Yeah.
And so sometimes that's really good. We've got another vacation question, and I just came back from vacation, so I understand the pain. This is from Kieran. Hey, Rebecca, leaving Friday for the Turks and Caicos. Should that island be okay? So I'm going to pull back up the same graphic we were just looking at. This is the ensemble means. This is the furthest west it could go, the furthest east it could go, and will most likely end up kind of in the center there. I think it should be okay, especially with the timing there. And so I think it will be fine. It certainly might be a rainier or rougher surf start to the vacation on Friday, but you know, by Monday, I think you're smooth sailing. Things are looking really nice out there. All right, we got another question. I'm in West Virginia. Will it hit West Virginia? I love being able to tell people, you're fine. Absolutely not. Not headed anywhere near West Virginia. We're good with that one. And so once again, if you have a comment or a question you want to ask Juliana or I, use hashtag #HeyRebecca or hashtag #HeyJuliana. And I saw we're also live on TikTok. I saw a question scroll by. I had it pulled up while you were at the wall, and it was a really interesting one. And I get this all the time, especially since I'm married to a fishing captain. I don't know if you know this, but avid fishermen are also wannabe meteorologists. And they all wave their weather apps in my face and say, hey, that's not what it says. And the comment was, it looks really different on the Windy app. And I don't know if you've ever used the Windy app, Juliana, but it's beautiful. And that's why people love it, because it's so stylized. But it is generally, unless you pay for the upgrade, it's generally just the raw GFS model.
Okay, that's good to know. I didn't know that. I have seen the Windy app. I have not used the Windy app.
Fishermen love the Windy app, and it is beautiful and it's very well designed. And I myself enjoy the Windy app sometimes, but I also understand that it is just the latest GFS model run most of the time, unless you pay for the upgraded data and you're getting the Euro. You're just not getting a bigger picture of what's going on, because it is just one model run. And that's the same argument that we have for people that were posting the long-term forecast last week for the storm, with it slamming into Florida as a Cat 5. That's what model runs do this far out. In fact, I think the GFS had one right behind it doing it again the following week. And so that's just not an accurate picture. It's never going to happen that way. That's why we don't share those types of model runs. We try to give you the broader picture, the more educated stance on what this means, what's still in question, and what's of course known and certain as it can be in this field.
Yes, because one model and one model run, let alone, that is not a forecast. That is not a proper forecast.
Yeah, it takes more than one. It takes trends. That's what we're watching for. We've got another featured question and comment. Everybody's going on vacation except us, man. Hashtag, hey, Rebecca, I have a trip to Punta Cana on the 17th of August. Should that be okay? And so the Punta Cana, I think, will be fine by then, especially how far away it's potentially going to stay. That's Saturday, which is...
The 17th is Sunday.
So it'll be pulling away.
Yes, it's kind of, because I got this question not yesterday but the day before about Punta Cana in particular, and it's kind of the same thing where I would imagine, first of all, it's going to be actively starting to turn away. I would imagine you'd want to be prepared for like you mentioned with the other trip question of maybe the first couple of days, maybe some icky wet. It all just depends on the exact positioning of the system. But, you know, be prepared for potentially some icky weather, but it'll be turning away at that point.
Yes, yes, yes. And then this is a fun question. This one's hashtag Hey Juliana. It looks like the models are now predicting a turn away from the Carolinas. Is that accurate?
I would say that's pretty accurate. Let me see actually which one I want to pull up here, because yes, a lot of them at least have been consistent with holding this out to sea and off of the eastern seaboard of the United States altogether. And eventually, yes, even a more aggressive turn with that long range. Let me see if I can get in here and put this out 10 days, the spaghetti model plots, because we have this out to 7 right now. And I want to show y'all what that looks like in the longer run.
Okay,
so
we're going to take that full screen so they can see.
There we go. And this is 10, not 7. And I think that's a fair thing to say, because at that point it will be even drifting farther to the north and east at that point, and not even just due north. So great question. And so far, yes, that's kind of what the signal is showing in the trends, the models, I should say.
And then we've got a comment on TikTok asking if we're so-called influencers. No, we're real meteorologists. We work for WFLA News Channel 8 in Tampa, Florida. Juliana came to us from Fort Myers. I came to you from Jacksonville. We have a combined about 25 years of tropical experience. So we do know what we're talking about here. We're not vacation planning for you guys. And that brings us to a really good question. This is from Brandon. What are the chances that it doesn't take that escape alley? And so what Brandon's talking about is Juliana was very carefully explaining why the turn is expected and why we have such a confidence in the turn, and she's pulling it up right now. And so then the question always is, what if the second high pressure speeds up or it's stronger than we think and air goes clockwise around to high pressure? So that's kind of steering Erin around that high pressure that's out over the Atlantic right now. So talk about some of the nuances, what we do know and what we don't know about taking that turn. It's pretty confident at this point.
Yes, yeah, that's the thing, is the confidence and the key word is consistency that we've now seen for days with the models from the jump. And we had Invest 97L and now Erin, and that's still been there. And so quite literally, to answer your question, the odds are incredibly low, to just be frank, I guess, that it would not pan out that way. And, this heat dome, actually when I had just last been glancing at this, I don't think the high pressure over the southeast United States will have the opportunity to have an influence on Erin. That's just not looking likely in the sense of dragging it back.
Yeah, when you don't have a big spread in the models like that, that means you have a high confidence, and there's not a lot that we expect to change with that. Because even if that heat dome that's in the high pressure that's developing over the southeast for the weekend, even if that were to build further south, it would just push the systems further south, like maybe even south of Cuba, if that were a scenario to play out. That's not what we expect. But just to play with the different dynamics, you see the dip in the jet stream, you've got the two competing high pressures, and so Erin's going to take the path of least resistance. Erin's not going to run into a high pressure. Erin's going to make that slide up to the north. We love a good turn. Yes. And so that brings us to another question, and this is kind of going to allow us to talk about the different spaghetti models. This one's for Ashley. Hey, Rebecca, I saw another spaghetti model that lowered it more south. What is correct? And so part of the problem with everything floating around the internet is there's not a lot of timestamps. So you might be looking at a spaghetti run from 2-3 days ago, maybe even a week ago. And so that's why if you get your information from trusted sources like your local meteorologist, like us, then we're going to be able to show you and explain to you the very absolute truth. Here's the latest model run that just came in this morning. And there's really nothing that moves it further south. But I will say, especially with some of the more dramatic posts on the internet, you don't know what models they're showing you, and there's no real great qualifications to have a model. There's one model that just moves it forward at the same speed and direction as it's moving right now. That's not helpful at all. And so sometimes when you see some of those really wonky outlier lines, it might not be an actual forecast model. It might be something like that one line that you could check on that shows it. If it continued to move in the same direction and speed that is moving right now, here's where it would go. Once again, not helpful at all.
Exactly. I 100% agree with you.
Oof. Yeah, I hate when we get those dramatic posts that spread fear.
A model like that existed.
Yes, I'll show it to you in the computer system. It makes my head hurt.
Oh boy.
And a lot of the models, maybe they don't have the funding to keep getting updated. The Euro and the GFS are premier models because, people invest in them and there is science and there's money behind it to keep updating them. Some of these 1970 models hadn't been updated. Like, we don't need that on there. We don't need to be worried about that. Yeah. All right. We've got another question. How is Puerto Rico looking this weekend? Everybody's going on vacation. And so it all depends kind of on that turn because obviously Puerto Rico is pretty close there. And so I don't remember the diameter of Erin. And so I don't remember how big Erin is, if it's going to be. It looks pretty compact.
Yeah. As of right now, which is good. And so, actually, let me bring in the zoomed in look. Hello. Because I feel like it's sort of the same messaging. And with us being uncertain, this also comes from the National Hurricane Center, where they are quite literally verbatim expressing there is high uncertainty right now with what exact impacts that areas like Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands can expect right now. So they, equally so as your local meteorologists, are all eyes on these areas to get a better idea. And I think once we see Erin strengthen and organize a little bit better, because yes, I agree with you. Erin is fairly compact at the moment. It'll be looking out to when we potentially tip over into that hurricane status and what Erin looks like at that point. We'll have a better idea. And as well as where Erin rides this cone, because Erin could, like you said, take a more aggressive turn and wind up on the northern portion of this forecast cone and be ways away from Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands.
You were explaining it so well at the wall. The cone is for where the center of the storm could be. So when you get past about 3 days out, that cone widens out pretty significantly. And so if it were the center of the storm were on the northern edge, when it becomes a category 3 as opposed to the southern edge. And this is a great tool, and this will tighten up a little bit over the next couple of days. These are the wind gust field. And so this is Friday morning. And so it's kind of business as usual in Puerto Rico at that point in terms of winds. But by Saturday is when you potentially could get those wind gusts. Red is 40. And so you're certainly looking at 20 to 30 mile per hour wind gusts if it were to take the center of the track, which once again, we don't necessarily expect. The center of the track doesn't mean anything.
A reminder here is that this is the European model. So in this scenario, we're only looking at one particular model, but this gives us an idea.
Yeah, it's just a good idea, and it's a great tool. One thing that's interesting is stronger storms turn faster to the north than weaker systems do. And so if it were to intensify a bit more quickly than what the National Hurricane Service is calling for, it may very well take that northerly track. If it's slower to intensify, it could take the southerly track. And so that's something that we'll be watching as well. This one's another featured comment from Daniel. Hey, Juliana, is there any chance of development in the Atlantic? Thanks, and big hugs to both of you. And so I think we already talked about models are already spinning up more stuff out there behind it.
Yes, yeah. Luckily, as of right now, this is pretty much all we have our eyes on. The National Hurricane Center, that was a great question because this brings us to the bigger picture of things, because there are going to be other things that pop up, especially through the next several weeks. But right now, they still have left technically this little disturbance in the northwest Atlantic with an X there, but they've dropped it to 0% odds of development. So it's kind of just lost its window to do anything. And now we have a tropical wave way over it's a Bay of Yucatan, I believe. It's in the far western kind of extent of the Caribbean that looks to cross over the Yucatan Peninsula, and when it reemerges in the Gulf, it has as of right now, quite literally a low chance to develop into a something. Right now, from what I had seen throughout this morning, models really barely organize this. So it's not looking likely that the U.S. would be talking about any direct impacts, although I have seen, some meteorologists over in Texas talking about, at the very least, some enhanced rain chances as a result.
And those weaker systems a lot of times produce that flooding inland rain. That's really scary stuff. So even if it doesn't develop, there's stuff to track there. This one coming to us from TikTok. Planning on traveling the week before Labor Day. Anything indicating another wave following Erin? So this kind of goes to what you were just talking about. Unfortunately, Jeanette, if you follow those long-term forecast models, they're going to drive you crazy, and you're not going to enjoy the weeks before your vacation as much as you should. And so it's too soon to tell, but hopefully things will stay a little bit quieter or fish stormy. We love a good fish storm.
Love a good fish storm.
You know what I was thinking about today? I think we need a sound effect for a fish storm because we have some fun sound effects. We just have to come up with one for a fish storm, I think.
I agree. I'm down.
All right. This is the last call for questions and comments. We're going to be wrapping this up in about 5 minutes, but this is our premier program for tracking the tropics here. And so we will hop on regularly and update you, and especially if anything changes, but we'll give you some regular updates. Juliana is doing a fantastic job of making sure that we have all the graphics and all the latest forecast models. And so here's another question. This one's for #HeyJuliana. What are the chances of it slowing down?
So it actually already has started to slow down a little bit, which was anticipated, and especially as essentially it anchors down a little bit and it wants to then just start to organize and strengthen. That is going to require, as well as not only it anchoring down and organizing, but the subtropical ridge that's just north of it and kind of helping it truck along, as that now is appearing to weaken just a touch. That's not going to help to push Erin along so much. So at least as of now, probably going to hold steady around here with forward moving speed. But what is this, Thursday, 8 a.m. into Friday? You can see it makes decent progression here over the next, 24 to 48. I think, Rebecca, if I can get your thoughts on this, it already slowed down a little bit. I don't know how much more it will slow down. It's moving to the west at 17 miles per hour. So in tropical storm worlds, that's kind of booking it. And so I do think it will probably slow down a little bit as it starts to intensify, because it's kind of hard to be moving that fast and intensify. Exactly.
And so if you can look at the track there, the space between the tracks is the expected forward motion. So that slowing down really starts when it's a category 3. You see how much closer the two category 3 icons are than the category 1 and category 2 icon. So I think when it starts making the turn, starts to intensify, I think that's when that forward motion would really start to slow down a little bit, but I would not expect anything out of what they're already predicting on this cone. I don't really see a reason for it to stall out. People reference storms that just stopped moving, like Dorian over the Bahamas and that sort of thing. There has to be a feature that stops it. It has to run into a blocking feature, like a high pressure, like a front, something like that. And there's just really nothing out in the Atlantic that would do that right now. It's going to take the path of least resistance between those two high pressures. That's what causes the turn, in addition to the Coriolis force and the fact that stronger storms turn a little bit further and faster than weaker systems do. So it will be about I think the uncertainty at this point is only in the intensification and how fast it intensifies. And I think that will ultimately determine whether it takes a more northern or southern edge of that cone. But I don't really expect an outlier outside of that cone.
Exactly.
All right, we're going to wrap it up. Let's do a 30-second recap because a lot of people didn't get that beginning good information. You want to show them the spaghetti models one more time and kind of give a little thought process on how we're not really worried about this one.
Yes. So really the key has been the consistency. So this is looking out 10 days specifically, and there's, some mild spread once we start looking beyond. So this is into Sunday. And we very much like how close together all of these spaghetti modal plots are all the way through the weekend. And then all of these, to some degree or another, take the jog to the north. Some of them are a little more aggressive a little earlier when it starts to turn, and then some of them wait a little bit longer for the turn and ends up, Erin could potentially end up a little farther to the west. But one way or another, the odds are looking more likely than not that this will stay over the open waters of the Atlantic off of at least the east coast of the United States. Unfortunately, Bermuda is pretty much right in the middle of what will likely be passing over Bermuda as Erin in some form or another.
Yes. And thank you so much for joining us. I have to get out so we don't interrupt the next program, but we'll see you later.